Welcome to Two Way. Thank you, everybody, for joining. This is a little bit of an unorthodox scheduling on our part. Normally, we talk in the morning on the morning meeting, then we talk in the evening on my program, still unnamed. But because of the debate and because we wanted to kind of make sure we had enough time to run through what people thought and look at where the race stands going ahead, we scheduled another session. What we didn't anticipate was the morning meeting going double its planned length to an hour. And for those of you who were not on the morning meeting this morning, you missed an incredible conversation, one of the most extraordinary I've experienced us having on the platform, where we had two young African American men who live in New York City talking to our friend Chris from Georgia, who's a Harris supporter. One of them is a former Bloomberg campaign person, one of them a former Bernie person, both of whom supporting Donald Trump now. And the conversation between them was it was amazing. If you missed it, it'll be posted soon. It's on YouTube now, actually, but I'll send it around soon. I highly recommend it. It was just an incredible conversation, very consistent with the ethos of this platform, right? A bunch of people who are supporting different candidates for president, but very happy to listen to each other and learn from each other, ask each other questions. It was just great, and I was pleased and honored to be a small part of it and have it go. So what we're going to do today to start off, we're just going to talk for 30 minutes here, is bring in two really, really smart people, Jill Alper, who's a longtime Democratic strategist, Matt Gorman, who's a Republican. And Jill, thank you. Matt, thank you. Matt, what's your posture? Who are you voting for in this election? Are you a Trump voter?
I'm a Trump voter. Yep.
All right. I just want to double check. I thought so. So we've got a Democrat who supports Harris. We've got a Republican who supports Trump. They're both super smart and genial and perfect for us. So, guys, I'd love you to first just do. You can certainly touch on the debate if you want, but I'd really rather you kind of forward looking. And if you think about Israel, you think about ground game, you think about everything that's going on, the prospect of no more debates, just level set on where you think the race is, who's more likely to win and why, and what you're kind of wondering about over the next 30 days. Jill, why don't you start? You're in Michigan. Just free form, whatever you want, but just kind of explain where you think things are and where you think they're headed and what you wonder about.
Sure. Well, I think that the Harris campaign continues to introduce her, oddly enough, at this stage in the campaign where it's October. And Governor Walz, who's a little bit more defined after last night, they're going to continue to talk about her economic plan. And then, that's the thing about presidential campaigns and politics in general that is always so exciting, interesting, and vexing for those who do the work, which is manage the crisis or issue of the day. So we certainly have a very sad situation in the Middle East continuing to heat up. What's going on in Lebanon, and I'll just leave that there. There's what's happening, as you mentioned, with the disaster recovery, and then there's also the port strike, right? So these are leadership opportunities for the administration, which, good policy is good politics. It's also difficult sometimes to be in the chair. But in this case, the campaign is running a campaign against a former president who has a record that is less than stellar. And so there's just going to be a tremendous need to multitask on the message front while they continue to prosecute their core argument and continue to build the momentum and harness the momentum that she has, which we've seen, hundreds of thousands of people sign up to volunteer for this campaign. And as they expand their massive field operation, as your program has focused upon, there is really this much, right? It's a game of inches in terms of persuasion, but you got to hold what you got and you got to win in the game of inches. And then it's really a mobilization game, right? And so the vice president is ahead and has been consistently ahead, has to be ahead by a certain amount. Many electoral strategists would say at the national level to accrue the electoral votes that she needs in the battleground states. And at the same time, those battleground states, you have to really just move out every last Democratic voter. That's harder, right? Democratic voters have a tendency to be less reliable in turnout. But from everything we're seeing, the so-called feeling thermometer, people are really concerned about the future of our country. And Donald Trump, I think we saw in the debate last night at the very end, the firecrackers over democracy, and the difference that the biggest validator about Vance, who was trying to present himself as a more compassionate conservative, really doubling and tripling down on Donald Trump, refusing to admit that Donald Trump lost the last election. So, the campaigns, this campaign is really actually not just out to win, but out to maintain democracy and demonstrate, communicate how real the Donald Trump threat is for our country, despite what you believe.
Okay. Joe, I'm going to make one reporting point, piggybacking on what you said, then ask you one question, and then I'd love Matt to do the same kind of overview of how he sees it. So my reporting is that lots of Democrats in the battleground states and elsewhere in Congress stated the Harris campaign, you have not cleared the bar on good steward of a good economy. And that the Harris campaign does not push back on that. They say, yes, as you said, we have more work to do there. And that the debate is really, how do you execute that, particularly when she's dealing with three crises that she's got to exercise those leadership responsibilities. And ending the strike probably doesn't convince people she knows how to be a good steward of a good economy for all sorts of reasons. And so the bandwidth is being taken up by things that are necessary, but don't necessarily go to that core need to deal with that. So that's something to watch closely. I want to just ask you about something that happened in your state this week. Your Senate candidate was caught on tape at a fundraiser, a video on a fundraiser, saying Kamala Harris is, quote, underwater in Michigan. Now, underwater in most professional parlance means not she's behind in the horse race. What it typically means, you correct me if I'm wrong, is her unfave is off, that more people view her unfavorably and favorably. I don't know if not every candidate knows polling jargon, but what do you know about what your Congresswoman Slotkin said, your Senate candidate, and whether that's true, and that's a concern of Michigan Democrats, as it's true every 4 years, Michigan Democrats are more worried about Michigan than national Democrats.
Right. Well, we tend to be a little bit bluer than the other battleground states, and with the exception, of course, of us losing in 2016, which happened in all of the blue wall states. But for Hillary Clinton, I'm not really sure what Congresswoman Slotkin was saying. I haven't talked to her about it. What I can say is what I see in public polls is that it's less than a point, so it's very close. Yes. But she's ahead. She is not underwater. And in her unfave, I see her more favorable than I do Donald Trump. I think what people worry about often in Michigan is that it takes all the work required, both in terms of persuading voters and mobilizing them, to get just over 50%, right? When you look at the average, Democratic performance in Michigan, it is about 50.2%. We might have a Whitmer win by 7-9 points, but the average Democrat, right, is going to be closer to that 50% mark. And we saw that, right, in the outcome of the 2016 election. And Biden won by a couple of points here. So the upshot is, I think what Michigan Democrats are saying in general is, don't look elsewhere, right? And we know this campaign has enough money to play all of these states. Congresswoman Slotkin is actually just under 50 or at 50, and her opponent, Mike Rogers, is at about 43%, right? She's in pretty good shape. She's outraised him 4-1, but that doesn't mean that this won't close in a particular direction. It looks like the scenario for a Democrat to win statewide in the state will have to look different. And so I think that's what you were hearing from her. I don't know that she meant the word underwater. I can't say for sure, but I would just say we're neck and neck and we need to keep the heat on.
Okay, Jill, thank you. Again, if you want to be in the conversation, two brilliant people you can ask questions of after just a little bit. Matt Gorman, how do you see the race overall? And again, what are you sort of wondering about going forward?
I mean, it jives a little bit with the debate last night, but to say this, I think it's the closest we're going to have since Bush v. Gore in 2000. I really, really do. And I've said this before, Pennsylvania will be the key. I think we're going to be talking about Lehigh and Erie County and Bucks County well into the election week, if you will. And look, I think what we kind of come into is a little bit of this trend where something happens that, whether Trump has a tough debate or the Harris bump where, 3-4 points Harris advantage. You see that bump, and then it recedes a little bit. And I think we're kind of seeing at that rescission point that of the bump that came after that Harris Trump ABC News debate. I mean, look, one thing I talk to folks that are smart on the Republican side, and they say, look at the seniors in Pennsylvania. They don't believe there's been some hay made that Harris is winning seniors in PA, which would be a very good sign for her. They are very skeptical of that actually being the case in this polling, particularly when it's a total trend line reversal from where things were in 16 and in 20. And they pointed that out to me. They said, look, if that's the case, what we're seeing in public polling, then they are very skeptical about what folks are seeing publicly in polling. What they say to me is that, look, we're not ready to put money down on us winning yet, but we're certainly not ready to put down on money on Kamala winning yet either. And it kind of goes to this point where you think you guys alluded to it. Look, this is going to be, I firmly believe, the last kind of massive salvo of a debate, right? Where debates have become more important in the last 10 years, in my opinion, because most candidates just talk to friendly media, they talk to their bases. Debates are one of the few times where it converges. So right now, usually that last debate, usually between the presidential candidates, would happen like October 24th. So you'd have like 10 days of a runway between the last debate and election day ish. Now we have over a month. We have 5 weeks. And to your point, you list off a couple things, Mark: longshoreman strike, Lebanon, Israel, and Iran. What is going to fill that vacuum in the next 5 months? Because one other thing that has happened in 16 and in 20 that has not happened this time is that back then Trump was so good at blotting out the sun. He would make a news cycle and it would dominate, good or bad. And we don't have that anymore. He's not setting the kind of the news cycle as he once did. And so what I'm very curious is what fills the news vacuum for the next 5 weeks, and who does that, by nature of it, who does that advantage? And I think that's going to tell us a lot about where things are.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you both. Jill, if you were the state director for North Carolina for the Harris campaign, and Madam, same thing for Trump, and you're looking at the disruption in the western part of the state, no mail delivery as absentee ballots are supposed to be going out and coming back in, disruption in polling places potentially, busy people who necessarily can count on making a priority to vote. That part of the state, Asheville's very liberal, but the surrounding exurbs and rural areas are more conservative. Some Republicans I've talked to are worried, and they say the people in Asheville are richer. They have lifestyles that would probably allow them to be more likely to vote. The people in the rural areas, their lives are more disruptive, and there may not be as regular voters. We know the Trump voters are less regular voters in general, and there's the education component there. That's just a reality. So again, Jill, if you were the state director, what would you be telling your folks in the western part of the state to do to try to not let this hurt your chances of winning?
Yeah, well, I think it's all hands on deck moment, right? And I would tell them to think creatively. I worked in 1989 on a governor's race for Doug Wilder, the first elected African American governor in the heart of the Confederacy, in our nation. And there was a mine worker strike going on in Southwest Virginia. We invented something called hauling and calling. People were going to camps.
Say it again. What do you call it?
Hauling and calling.
Yeah.
And what it was, though, is hard to call. Because some people had their phones turned off, right? So it was very a 1989 style curated, right voters, right places strategy, but where we started going to the camps and figuring out, right, when we could get to people, we would run trucks up and down the roads, the haulers too, and we would arrange with people when we could help get them to the polls, right? But we would go to the camps where they were gathering already for their meals, right? Because people, they didn't have the money to eat. So you have to sort of reverse engineer your plan to how people are living or responding to the crisis at hand. And you have to be compassionate, and you have to lean in to those moments in the appropriate way. But you don't stop, and you may need to bring people in from other places, right? So it's just, as they say, campaigns are war by other means. You have to, pull up the old ironing board and have your makeshift office and collaborate with people there who know how their response is literally impacting how people live, and applying your tactics from the people back, and you're organizing from the people back.
Matt, as you add to that, I'd love for you to address the question of the election officials, right? There's state and local and county election officials. Is it proper for the campaigns to be talking to those folks, to the parties to be talking to those folks, to say, like, how many polling places are going to be open? Are the hours going to be limited? Is that something you can do, or is that a separate function?
I mean, you can, and usually the lawyers do it, right? In the context of election day operations, they're regimented in how they do that sort of thing because it's a legal thing at the end of the day. But you're right. I mean, you've been building out your election day operations when it comes to lawyers and making sure that things are handled in that regard, and that's been done for years and years and years, for a long, long time in advance of this. That's number one. I think it's twofold. You have to nationalize this. The politics is so nationalized now. You have to use the megaphone of the top of the ticket to mobilize some of these voters. You're right, but also I think we've seen in recent years, especially with kind of the changes in election laws and how you can pay for certain things. For example, during the Tom Suozzi special election right outside of New York City, if you remember, there was a big snowstorm. So CLF, the outside group for Republicans in the House, paid for, I believe, like plows to go and make sure people could get to the polls on election day. Now, you need to think creatively. And so you spin up outside groups that can do the proverbial equivalent of that can take people that, give them a hot meal, give them a place to charge their phone, and make sure that they can go vote. You have to kind of think creatively, and I think you have to pair, certainly, look, Jill kind of put it well, and she kind of said, like, she's helping feed the mine workers too. You have to just not purely give them, hey, we need you to vote. Here's some vote. Here's a vote. We'll also, we'll give you a sandwich. We'll take care of your basic human needs as a way to get them there first, and then obviously get them to do what you need to do at the ballot box too. You got to think creatively.
Jill, as you look at the Trump campaign, what's the thing they're doing now that seems smart to you?
Yeah, I think it's just trying to create confusion, right? Which has been his MO. For him to say that President Biden wasn't in touch with the governor or governors about disaster relief, just, the cats and dogs, all of those kinds of things. He doesn't have a plan to sell. He doesn't have a record to sell. So they're looking to tear down the vice president and her running mate and the president and create a different conversation.
I think Jeb Bush was the first person to call him in 16 the chaos candidate, and that was very shrewd of Jeb Bush. Matt, what's the Harris campaign doing that looks smart to you?
Doing more interviews. Look, I think they need to do more. And last night was a very clear example why. They need to get out there more, and they're doing local stuff. But if I were them, I would start doing a few more bigger, notable ones that have a wider audience, and not just doing kind of local stuff. But I think she's smart in doing, for example, Matt Barnes's podcast that's NBA focused, geared towards African American men. She's taken a page from kind of the Trump playbook in that regard, where working on podcasts, niche audiences to try and juice some very small electoral totals among, kind of targeted audiences.
Yeah, but she's doing 60 Minutes, so that's right in line with what you're saying.
Yep.
It's a big audience. All right, thank you both. Awesome. Jeffrey, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are, who you're supporting, and ask what you'd like to ask.
Yeah, I'm Jeff. I'm on the North Shore of Chicago, independent voter, supporting Harris. One question that I have is, and I think most people believe that Vance won the debate on points, et cetera. He was very smooth, if you will. To me, Tim was a bit overcoached and missed several opportunities. His strongest point was around January 6th. So I actually have two questions. One, Jill talked about this whole thing is about a game of inches. And so for undecided voters, in a game of inches, does she think that the conversation about him not being able to admit that Trump lost the election, so it's not with a overarching statement of threat to democracy, but most common people can understand owning defeat and taking responsibility. The fact that he was not able to do that, could that move some undecided voters? And secondly, because they were actually civil to one another, Vance came across as human. Does it really remind people that Trump just does not have the temperament to be president? And in a way, is it possible that Vance's performance kind of highlights that and reminds people of what normal looks like?
Yeah, two great questions. Matt, you'll go first this time. Jeff, did you like Vance more last night than you did previously?
Oh, I knew from the very beginning that he was going to be very smooth and very
Yeah,
prepared. And I think for people who are not terribly informed, he came across as a reasonable person. He came
yeah.
across as knowledgeable, if you will. But
Yeah.
that was the
Okay.
role that he was choosing to play that night.
Okay. Matt, answer
Yeah.
one or both.
Yeah, real quick. I think the hardest thing to do sometimes is in anything is when you're expected to do well, and that was Vance last night. Everyone knew his bar was set very high, and he cleared it. That's number one. And I was talking with his team, the night before, and they were very aware. He was also very aware of his vulnerabilities around his image and likability, and he knew that was a challenge for him. And when I kept hearing the words going into it was disarm the critiques, right? And I think that's what his nature was, very disarming. That's number one. And also the abortion answer, which kind of got overshadowed a little bit. I mean, that I think was kind of the first answer in salvo of JD Vance 2028. I mean, close your eyes, and that could come from Nikki Haley. It was a very surprising tone, but I think a smart one. And yeah, I think that was very interesting to see. On the second point, I will say on the January 6th stuff, I'm just skeptical. I think not everything needs to have a direct voter impact. I think what the January 6th salvo did is it gave Democrats, and I don't mean this in a mean way, you want something to push. You want something to go on offense. It was shaping up to be a kind of tough night for Tim Walz. They were going to be on defense for a lot of his performance. So that salvo gave them something to go on offense about, gave them a strong takeaway and something to push. And it gave them a little bit of something they can use.
Jill.
Sure. So thank you, Jeffrey, for those questions. I think that, these debates are such artificial environments, and people know that, right? Tim Walz, though, did do himself well in the sense that the CNN net favorability, he came out, as a plus 37. And I think that Vance maybe did slightly better in his gain, but he's still at a net -3. And what people wanted to see there is, can either one of these people be president of the United States? What's their temperament? And in spades, I think that he showed he could, Walz, be the president, and that he has empathy for people. And empathy is going to be an important component to how people look at the vote that they cast. Now, having said that, they're still voting for Trump or they're voting for Harris. But that was where Walz did himself and his ticket well by continuing to draw back up the contrast between Harris and Trump. So I think that box is checked. So despite it being civil, what needed to happen happened for the broader dynamic, right, as a check mark for the ticket winning. When you get to this issue of freedom, people don't want, right, this chaos anymore. That's why we're talking about moving forward. Turning the page is a phrase you often hear from the Harris-Walz campaign. This has gone through different iterations. The subject of democracy, where the word democracy itself has been politicized in a sense by the Trump forces. But people have reverted back and sort of put democracy in the basket of freedom. And that, of course, is the song we hear, the Beyonce song that we hear Kamala Harris walk out to at these rallies. So, people just don't want any more of that rancor. And they're fundamentally, particularly older voters, younger voters in a different sense, but particularly committed to the idea of America before politics. So that was an important exclamation point on the end of the debate, and hopefully helpful in your thinking about the subject.
Jeff, thank you. Jill, thank you. Deborah, tell folks who don't know where you are, who you're supporting, and what's on your mind, please.
Hey everyone, my name is Deborah. I'm calling from New York City. I'm a Harris supporter, but I would love to talk about Vance. I was surprised at just how well he did, and I did wonder. I put this in the chat if it wasn't that it was the comparison, and we've talked a lot about the comparison, the civility, the agreement on things. It harkened back to the olden days. My question, I guess, is Vance is really good at this. He knows this is his milieu, this is his strength speaking. Some people touched on this last night in the two-way, but it felt like this was an audition for him more than a VP debate. And I think that I don't know how Trump feels about this, but certainly for me, it felt like it was a well-crafted and well-rehearsed performance. He knows that this debate doesn't matter so much, so he took this opportunity to introduce himself to the world as the next iteration, the next generation of the MAGA movement. I don't recall how many times he even referenced Trump in the debate. This was the JD Vance show. I wonder how much, even though VP debates don't move the needle, how much that is actually going to be the needle mover as a result of last night.
Deborah, thank you. Matt Gorman, lots of ways to approach this. I'll narrow down to one. If you're Tom Cotton or someone who works for Tom Cotton or Marco Rubio or someone who works for Marco Rubio, do you look at last night and say, well, that guy is now, win or lose, is that guy now got used last night to position himself as the front runner for 28? Hold on. You got to unmute again. Sorry.
1,000%, 1,000%. And look, it showed a couple things, right? That he certainly knows that these are television shows. Debates are television shows. You have to treat them as such, right? And he understands that, and that is also why, very smartly, look, Republicans too often, in my opinion, run from the mainstream media, and it hurts them. And the dichotomy of having Vance, who's done a lot of media, a lot of tough media, Sunday shows, sat with Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation, and Vance, who hadn't. And look at this way. The measure of performance in a debate, in my opinion, is the tough but expected question. What question do you know is going to come, but it's going to be tough for you? Abortion in 2020 for Vance. For Walz, it was the China Tiananmen Square. Where were you? The answers on that were pretty different, and the Walz just showed he wasn't used to that, where Vance has. So my lesson, if I'm sitting at Tom Cotton and Marco Rubio, wherever, is look, if you want to compete on level with Vance on a 2027, 2028 debate stage, you need to be doing regular reps in the media, getting your cuts in the batting cage, because he is, and it's showing.
Thank you. Deborah, thank you. I want to get a Trump voter in because we just happen to have two Harris voters. So Bruce, one of my reliable Trump folks in Virginia, Bruce is a Trump supporter. Bruce, go ahead and unmute. Ask your question, Deborah, again. Thank you.
Well, it seems to me I think the development of real events is actually going to swamp a lot of the political calculations here. You've got four really active crises right now: Ukraine, the hurricane, the longshoreman strike, and the Middle East. Except for the hurricane, the other three have been brewing for a long time. And one of the things people expect from a president is to be able to keep crises that are brewing from exploding into something uncontrollable, which seems to be happening on three of those fronts. The hurricane, we'll see how that plays out. But I think that's going to really play to Trump's advantage here, because when people look at these things blowing up around the world, they're going to say, not only how are these being managed, which in my view, they've been completely mismanaged, but Trump prevented these kinds of things from blowing up. And I think the record of Harris and Biden is that they mismanage these things. So I think the events, these things are only going to get more intense. If the longshore strike goes on for, I've heard everything from a week to a month. Month is long, but already the crunch is going to start hitting. God knows what's going to happen in the Middle East. It's really scary to me. So these are going to escalate, and I think that's going to change the environment.
Bruce, thank you. I want to see if we can end pretty close on time. So Jill, I'm pretty sure you know both Lorraine Bowles, who's the OVP chief of staff, and Sheila Nix, who's the campaign chief of staff. They've got primary responsibility, unlike Gore Clinton, which you're very familiar with, where there wasn't totally seamless integration during this phase, I would say. This is very tightly integrated. So if you're the campaign chief of staff or the vice president's chief of staff, you're dealing with the West Wing, you're dealing with the president's chief of staff on all three crises. As you said, good policy is the best politics. But just talk about how you think they're thinking about those three things and what your concerns would be if you were in one of those jobs. Is it to make sure you get sign off on photo ops and statements? Is it to make sure that the president is not overshadowing her, or that he's taking responsibility? How would you think about these three challenges from both the campaign point of view and the government point of view?
Yeah, well, I do know these people. I haven't talked to these people, but what I can tell you is that we've seen years of them winning important fights for the American people and managing crises. And I think they're just going to continue to do the right thing. Honestly, I know that sounds a little Pollyanna-ish, but they're all in their lanes, right? And if the president and the administration manage these crises well, that will accrue benefits to our side of the ledger. So I don't think that there's any second guessing. I don't think anybody's getting over their skis now, because the outcome of these things could determine the outcome of election. I think people are doing their jobs, I guess, as the New England Patriots would say.
You know, do you think any or all three could in fact determine the outcome, depending on how they go?
I don't think any one of them is determinative, because I do think voters bring a broad frame and a historical reference to the two choices at hand. And so, you know, they'll certainly be front of mind for some of the, you know, the last voters to make their decisions, but it's the totality of the leadership, not just the crisis of the moment.
Okay. Bruce, thank you. And Jill and Matt, we're all very grateful to you for sharing your expertise. Sorry we didn't get to all the hands that are up, but we're going to end here. But again, very grateful to both Matt and Jill for coming. Today, if there's breaking news, we'll give you a notification. There'll be another two-way if there's some breaking news we need to deal with. If not, tomorrow, 9 a.m. morning meeting. And then at 5 p.m. tomorrow, Lauren Leader is doing a show about the complicated challenge concerned to both parties, which is how to address both the private sector and the government dealing with childcare. So Lauren will have that. Great guest tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern time. Again, you can see it on YouTube. You can get the way to log in on our X account or in my Substack. So thank you very much. We might see you later today. Otherwise, 9 a.m. tomorrow for the morning meeting. Thank you so much. Have a great day.